Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I am going to be ranking Wilkie Collins. It sounds weird to say that as if I'm like judging an author, but not really. I'm just going to be sharing with you today my thoughts on Wilkie Collins and the books of his that I've read and what I think about them so far. So I have read a total of 7 of Wilkie Collins' books, and I thought this was a great time of year, being in the middle of October and victober, to share my thoughts on each of the 7 books, which was my favorite, which was my least favorite so far, and again, answer that question of where to start since I just finished another book of his. So I'm going to go through this from my least favorite, if you will, all the way up to what I think is his best work and my most favorite. And I've got to admit, this was really hard to do. My least favorite was probably the easiest. Picking like the top 5 out of these 7 was really hard, but I think I have it right. Anyway, I'm going with what I have written down. Okay, number 7 would be Armadale. And this tells the story of 2 guys who are affected by the life choices of another man. All of the men are named Armadale in this book because that's the last name, but they all have the same exact name going back into history. It's a bizarre setup, I'll be honest, but it's kind of interesting and it works. I really liked this book. I still gave this book a number 4 stars, but there was something about it that just didn't work for me. I liked where it started out. About halfway through, it feels like everything about the book changes. Certainly, your protagonist seems to change. Like, literally, your protagonist changes. Like, not just the point of view and the person telling the story. It seems like the entire main focus of the book changes as well as who the main character now is. So that was probably one of the things that I had a lot of like, wait, what happened? I did like the point of view we changed to, and in fact, that person became a much more interesting character when you started getting their point of view. And I'm not going to tell you who because I don't want to include any spoilers here, but just beware there is a major point of view and protagonist change halfway through the book. And at some point during that protagonist like narrative, the book just started to feel long. It is a long book, but that's when it started feeling long. And it's one of his few books that I felt like felt really long and that I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. I'm glad I did. It was a really interesting ending. In fact, the ending kind of picked up towards like the last little chunk. So it was just a really strange, like, middle section of the book. Like, not bad. I think it just throws you off because you keep expecting it to go back to that point of view. And I will spoil that for you and tell you it doesn't. So because the book was a little too long in my opinion and just had a plot and perspective change that I don't think was handled well, and just went on too long in one direction and then changed courses, I felt like those were really weak aspects of the book. Interestingly enough, Armadale is considered one of his 4 great novels, and I disagree with that, as you'll see, because all other 6 books I think are better, and most of the rest of them are novels. So, I don't know. Number 6, and this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, it certainly surprises me, is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. This is, I would say, one of his 2 most well-known books. One of his books that if you just go into any bookstore, you're going to find on the bookshelf. Like if you find a Wilkie Collins section, or even a classic section, and they have Wilkie Collins, you'll probably find The Moonstone. There has been a really good TV series made off of this book, and I liked this book a lot. It was my other 4-star read by Wilkie Collins. I really enjoyed it. I think the main reason it ended up as a 4 for me, because honestly, otherwise I would have ranked it higher. I'm still kind of surprised I didn't give it a 5, but I think it suffered from one of the same issues that I had with Armadale, which is towards the end of the book, it just started feeling too long. I felt like it should have wrapped up before it did. I also felt like this book was kind of hard to get into. There were multiple changes in perspectives. There was sort of a weird narrative voice going on. I personally don't think Wilkie Collins tends to start his books well, and to me, The Moonstone was no exception. That said, I did love The Steward. whose perspective you start out with. I love the narrative voice. I love Robinson Crusoe now just from hearing him talk about it so much throughout the book. And if you know, you know. But somehow it just still ended up being a 4 for me. I do think I'm biased towards Wilkie Collins' sensation novels. I tend to really enjoy sensation novels, and I tend to enjoy them much more than detective novels. And I also find that the mystery element that are in these books, I don't really need. So because The Moonstone is largely based around the mystery and much heavily having to do with this detective aspect and figuring out the mystery, and in some ways is significantly less of a sensation novel because of that, I think that's the other reason it ranks lower for me. That said, if you like detective fiction and you like a, good jewel heist mystery trying to be solved, read The Moonstone. It's totally worth it. And if you think it's too long for you, watch the movie because that's really good too. Number 5, I'm really surprised is number 5 because after I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is probably going to be like my first or second favorite Wilkie Collins now, which is the only reason that I know it for sure ranks higher than The Moonstone, and that would be No Name. Again, this is a book that is really good. It's a sensation novel, so it gets into domestic family life that just gets totally destroyed in the opening of the book. That's no surprise if you know what sensation novels are. And it's kind of your sort of original domestic thriller type of thing. It's definitely something that takes place in the domestic sphere. Lots goes wrong, and usually the rest of the book is trying to maybe see if you can possibly pick up all the pieces, but usually they just fall apart further. That said, this book was one where I thought the beginning started really well, set the scene, had an amazing shock factor partway through the opening, like one that made me drop the book and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's what like the thing is going to be that destroys his family. I did not see that coming. So that was shocking to me, especially for Victorian times. And then it went on, and like Wilkie Collins likes to do, he tends to change settings a lot, and different things tend to happen to characters in different places. And I really enjoyed all the settings. And there is another character who's introduced partway through the book who does show up at the beginning, but has a much more prominent role later on, who I absolutely ended up loving. Just a classic character that's conniving and all sorts of things, and that you don't really trust and know you shouldn't, but you can't help but like anyway for reasons that I'd have to look into further. But yeah, the character development in this is just really interesting. Lots of thought-provoking themes throughout the book, which is what I always love about Wilkie Collins. He's always got something to say about Victorian morals and how it's not working, and particularly how it's not working for women. And I thought you got a lot of that in here. It looks at one particular aspect of domestic life that he definitely felt like was part of the Victorian institution that was really ruining the potential of families. And I don't want to share what that is because that gets into the spoiler, but I really enjoyed this book. Again, this was another one of Wilkie Collins that towards the end, I felt like he dragged out just the ending of it. I didn't feel like the book was too long. There were parts of it, like I was enjoying the length because I was enjoying the characters and I was enjoying the plotting and the scheming and all of that. But towards the very end resolution of it, I thought that part just got drawn out a little too long. So that just kept it from beating out some of the other books that I'm going to talk about next. Book 4 for me is The Evil Genius. This is a book that I literally just read in the last week and really, really enjoyed. It's one of the few books by Wilkie Collins that I think he actually started really well. From the very beginning of this book, I was interested, I was invested, the pacing started out really well and kept going strong. I think the reason this book for me didn't rank higher is even though I have a lot of mixed feelings about how this book ended, that wasn't actually my biggest beef with it. It was actually that towards the ending, he spent just a little too long wrapping it up, and it lost some of the pacing that he had built into it. So I kind of wish that there was a confrontation in the book that happened sooner and faster. And then I think if he had have concluded the book in the same way, it would have worked. That said, coulda, woulda, wished he didn't. And so therefore it's ended up in number 4. The Evil Genius tells the story of a family. Again, it's another sensation novel, so it takes place in domestic life, and it tells the story of a family and multiple characters and what happens during the introduction of a governess that they are trying to help out. And the whole book just explores the idea of who is causing this family to fall apart. And I think one particular character is expressed as being the evil genius overall, but I still think that question is up for grabs. This was a really good book. It introduced a lot of difficult themes that women would face at the time, had a lot of really interesting characters, and Wilkie Collins did a really good job of playing with your emotions involving them. Like, there were times where you would be rooting for one person and then you might change to somebody else, and then you didn't know who you liked and didn't like, and you kind of liked them all and then hated a few. It was a roller coaster of a ride, and I enjoyed every minute of it. This is a shorter book by Wilkie Collins, so in that sense is a good one to start with, but I don't think it's actually the best place to start with him. Again, because I don't think it has the best ending, and I think in general he tends to end his books pretty well, even though I have complained about some of them being too long. This one doesn't suffer from that. It's just I don't actually think the ending as a whole, from like the resolution to the denouement, if you will, is that great. But I still liked it. I did give this book 5 stars, so I really am being nitpicky here to order these last 7. Like, as you noticed, my lowest ranked one is still a 4. I think all these books are good. I'm just trying to give you an idea of like what might be problems with them and why I think some are better than others. But The Evil Genius is really good if you like looking at stories that are about family life and trouble in the family life. Like, all of his books are kind of good for that. But this one, I would say that was why I liked it, and that was also the issue that I had at the end. Book number 3 for me was Basil, and this book I really ended up enjoying. It was super hard to pick my top 3. In fact, I was just going back and forth with them over and over again. I still don't know if this is how I'd order my top 3, but it's the last order I put them in, and I'm sticking with it for now. But Basil is a story that I enjoyed because it felt like a change up from Wilkie Collins' usual. Wilkie Collins tends to focus a lot on women and the struggles that women have in marriage and in family life, particularly during the Victorian period, because of what he felt like were issues with Victorian morals and Victorian society. And I liked this book because it focused on the male perspective. It is a book that is told by a male protagonist and really features his story and his side and how he kind of ends up feeling trapped by the Victorian morals and laws at the time, and just, why it won't work and could really mess with him in a way that society was probably not intending. And you follow Basil from basically sometime later in his life, reflecting back and recounting his story, trying to get the reader of whatever it is that he's writing to understand how he ended up in the place where his family life has fallen apart. Not to necessarily excuse himself and his part in it, but to just bring more understanding into the situation. And I really think that speaks a lot to a lot of Wilkie Collins's books. And this one was just really gripping to read. You really do kind of see the writing on the wall, and it's hard to watch, or listen to Basil just continue to work his way through this drama and not realize the drama that's unfolding. But it's believable the way that it's told. And the end ends on a nice sort of like thriller note, and you don't know where things are going to go. You get a final last note, and it was just very satisfying. I really, really liked this book, much more than I even thought I would, given that I feel like it's a book I've heard virtually nothing about. And it's really one that if I could just say the top 3 are all tied for first place, and not feel kind of guilty about it, I would, because I liked it that much, and I think it's a really solid book from beginning to end. Which brings me to my second place book, which is going to Miss or Mrs. I have mentioned this book a lot. It is definitely one of my favorite things that I've read by Wilkie Collins. And the nice thing about it is it's a short book. It's just 88 pages in the edition that I read. So it's really novella length. And I love it because I think it encompasses all of my favorite parts of Wilkie Collins: the sensation genre, the drama, the domestic life, a really interesting, strong female protagonist who still kind of fits a lot of the tropes of female characters in the Victorian period, but not in a stereotypical way, if you will. It really explores some of the issues that come up in marriage and relationships then and just always, I feel like. And it does it in a dramatic and entertaining way, all in a very short novel that doesn't feel too short, which I feel like is sometimes can happen with novellas. I feel like it's the perfect length. It tells you the whole story, and the ending of this book is mind-blowing. It's astounding. Like you have to read it to know, and it's worth it. But this is the book that I often say, if you want to know where to start with Wilkie Collins, I still recommend this book. Even after all the other ones that I've read by him, I still think this is a great place to start with him because I think it gives you a great sense of the sensation novel, a good sense of his writing style and how he touches on all sorts of different themes, how he has quirky characters in his book. That's not bad writing. He just has quirky characters in his books at time, and there's definitely at least one in this book, and how everything is just like super dramatic in sensation writing. So if you don't like this book, you're probably not going to like most of his writing. You're probably going to have a problem with one of those things that I mentioned. So just imagine them all being drawn out even longer, and that'll give you a sense of whether or not you'd like it. Do you want that pacing to continue? Do you want that domestic drama to go on? Do you want to continue to have the occasional oddball character and to have very thrilling but somewhat overly dramatic moments? If that's you, sign up, read some more. And that brings us to my number one favorite Wilkie Collins book to date, and that is The Woman in White. And this was a hard one again, guys, to put at number one. And I think the main reason is that I do love this book, but I don't think the start of it is as strong as some of his others. For example, The Evil Genius, I think actually starts and grips you way better at the beginning and carries the pacing a little bit better. The Woman in White starts really slow, and I think makes it really hard to get into this book, even for somebody who likes Wilkie Collins. I think it's a slower start than most of his books. That said, you hit a point where you finally understand, like, who the woman in white is. Well, maybe you don't understand who the woman in white is, but you meet the woman in white. And from that point on, it really starts to pick up and you start getting into the mystery of it all and that kind of thing. This is definitely one of his longer books, but I think I put it in number one because I think it's one of his most beautifully written ones. And that really does count for a lot, I think, in the reading experience. Like, if you are willing to just sit back and relax, I think this is a book that just carries you along and you get wrapped up in the beautiful writing of it and the scene and the interesting characters and people that you meet. I think his characters are much more mature and much more fascinating in some ways in this one, without edging on the line of being a caricature as some of them can be. And I just feel like it's a much more mature piece of writing for him where everything came to its height, even if it's not as fast-paced as some of his other works. And I think that's one of the reasons that this book of his has stood the test of time. So that's it. That's my rating of all the books of Wilkie Collins that I have read. I'm sure some of them are placed in places that surprise people, especially because his top four like greatest novels are Armadale, The Woman in White, The Moonstone, and No Name. And you'll see that three of those four were my lowest books. And to me, that's personally not surprising. That's why I like to read more of a particular author, because it's not uncommon to find that the works of theirs that continue to be in print and that continue to be read are just sort of a word of mouth or word of study kind of thing, where it's just the ones that keep being put out but aren't necessarily their best works. And in my opinion, they're not his best works. They're certainly not bad works, because my lowest rating was still a 4. They're just not my personal favorites. I definitely listed my top 3. I think if you're going to read books by Wilkie Collins and don't want to read everything he's ever written, I think if you read the top 3 that I mentioned in this video, you would be very, very pleasantly surprised. And I don't think it would be any issue for you to continue on reading. I would easily recommend all of these books. I think just outside the top 3, I think there are a lot of things that some people might not like as much, and then starts to become a lot more a personal preference and interest in Victorian fiction, etc., and especially the sensation genre. If you don't like the sensation genre, you're going to have problems with Wilkie Collins. That said, again, even though The Woman in White is my number one, I would not start there. I definitely think you should make sure you like the sensation genre more and that you're okay with a slower paced book before picking that one up. And that's it for today. Let me know if you've read any of these books and how you would rank them. And I will talk to you next time. Bye!